Welcome everyone to Metagame Monday for April the 20th. We are 7 weeks away from NYSE, and we're going to go over what went on the 4 challenges this past week. It is the last week of challenges before Secrets of Strixhaven drops on MTGO, with somewhat tentative cards that could make it in. I'm just done playing actually a legacy paper event, full cap 64 players for the 90s MTG Open, which will be on the front page of Twitch on Wednesday. I will drop a link in the description, please don't miss it. We have myself and Matt playing on camera. Matt made it very deep into the tournament, no spoilers, but playing very cool decks. And there was a bit of a mud rush in New York to acquire enough flow states to play this, and the card felt pretty strong. It's TBD how it's gonna go. But just from seeing it in Legacy being played, I think it might have an impact in Vintage. Still, TBD, we'll see how it ends up going, but I would not be surprised if we see this card break into Vintage. Regardless, let's talk a bit about the results for this challenge. So I'm going to do a couple more things because in challenges online, it is very common to split the finals. If you've played in paper, generally you are able to split eight ways or 4 ways or whatever. At any step of the top 8, you can split pricing. In online, A, you cannot draw, but also B, it's almost impossible to facilitate an 8-way split. And so usually it is not uncommon for finals to split, in which case you lose a little bit of like the who did actually won and who didn't. So we're gonna present the finalists with the cards being foil as the winner of the challenge, and then whichever deck paired, and then we'll talk a little bit about developments. So first challenge of Friday, we got Lora's Bug beating Jewel in the finals. For the challenge on Friday, we got Oath of Druids beating Jewel, and then Saturday we had Initiative beating Lora's Pio, and the Sunday morning, we had another Initiative winning over Esper Loras. So let's go over and move everyone to their respective places. Boop, 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 boop. This also comes here. And so basically, as we were talking about on the last Metagame Monday, we can see a relative return to what I would expect the meta to be. If you recall, the last time this column, the shops column, was extremely large. We had about 11 decks here, if not 12. And this time it's a lot more reasonable. We still are seeing a lot of dredge players or dredge decks making it deep into the tournament. And we're also seeing more versions, or more players rather, playing it and being added to the dumps. Still, decks are at about 4 to 6 graveyard hate cards. It's a deck that has a bit of good reach against PO decks, and some of these shops decks actually don't have enough good tools for it. So if you go into the meta not respected dredge enough, right now you are getting clapped. Honestly, there's a lot of them, and also a lot of them that are 4 and 2 and just don't make it to top 8 for cuts. So first insight of just 2 weeks in a row with 4 dredge players basically playing the exact 75s, with maybe, don't yell at me, but maybe with a couple of cards here and there, but basically the same lists. So yeah, people should start maybe respecting it more, or playing decks that bit more into it. As I was also talking about, I was expecting a bit of a return to Frog, and we see 3 more copies. We'll talk about this bug list later because it's very interesting. 4 PO decks coming back into the top 8, which makes sense. And we lost a couple Breach players to get access to these POs. Now, 2 of these PO decks, I believe, are on the 4th Theolingus version, and the other 2 are on Breach. And I believe only one of them was still playing 4 Commandeers. I think actually Miharu went back into it. So with that, and maybe a little bit less of the shops decks, it stands to reason that PO has come back a little bit into the meta. We also got 3 Oath of Druids decks, and these are all very different from each other, in my opinion. 2 of them are very much into 4 new rods, with one being like the classic, the other being the same version that we had the last week of like a steamer with run and 6 Oath control and just a couple of Atraxas. One of these had 4 new rods just straight up, and the other was the 3 Atraxa, 1 Raph and Mikey version. So a lot of variety for Oath. And pretty interesting to see the development, since it's been a while since there's been actual movement from the lists from what I saw. So it's cool to see 3 versions that have relatively different approaches to the meta, despite, you know, sharing the common theme of Oath of Druids. So on the workshops column, we have 5 lists: 2 Jewel, 2 Raker, and this Emery list that's basically a prison shops that is playing full 4 Emerys to take advantage of the recursion. Think cards that maybe you don't see as much in shops like Aether Spellbomb or Soul Guide Lantern, and even because you have sufficient white or sort of enough blue cards, you have a couple forces and able to screen that sort of stuff. On the sort of other or more, less established, let's say, we got one player playing Turbo Doomsday. The return sort of after putting 2 players through the last chance qualifiers into the showcase qualifier for Vintage, and then all of those players dropping that deck for the showcase qualifier. We see the return of the Blue-White Initiative deck with Quantum Brittler doing pretty well. A deck that I feel is relatively okay positioned. I think there's still more to be done with the deck. It does feel like Riddler fits very well into it, but it's still kind of trying to find its footing. At least from my experience when I've played against it, it seems like there's still more polish to be done on that deck. And speaking of decks that need more polish, we got 2 Ocelot Pride, sort of, white-black Lurus aggro decks. So, not hiding this whatsoever. Justin, I'm actually level 1, has been playing a lot of leagues offline and doing very well. In fact, I think it's on 3rd trophy right now. I'll post a link to this deck in particular because they were playing this aggro Lurus Ocelot Pride white-black deck, with the idea being that you are playing very fast threats that can win the game by themselves while also playing, the quote-unquote long game, and you're also playing a lot of disruption in the form of Magdi or Spider-Woman if you're not playing online. Also, Mai and things like those, like Stony Silence, all of that. That list has been taken from just the video and innovated a little bit. These were just 2 of the... 2 of the tops, and there were more lists in it. Let me open just this so you can take a look. So here you see the deck. So yeah, just basically has moved a little more into, I think they just dropped, I think it was Doubt, like Spider-Woman was dropped in favor of Dark Confident, just to keep powering all your cards, because, again, we curve out at 2. It's a good outlet for the life gain from Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride, and we're playing full Moxen plus Petal just to power out our 1 and color pips, so that we ostensibly could play all of our deck, all of the cards in our deck on turn 1. Only 3 Wastelands instead of 4, which sort of makes sense if you want to keep this mana base, especially because it's a little clunky just that you have all of this mana to ramp out your Disruption or your Source of Card Advantage while also playing 4 main deck Stony Silence. Obviously no Saga. And you want 2 basics, but it's possible that you could fit the 4th Wasteland here instead of the Scrubland, but I think maybe like at that point you have too many. Like, let's say that this is a Wasteland, you'd have 5, 6, 7, 8 colorless sources that don't cast any of your spells. So it might be that this is correct. I'm suspicious when I see 3 Wastelands, 1 Strip Mine, but regardless. And then a sideboard that just meant to not die on turn 1 and put some pressure on the combo decks with Deafening Silence. Priest, because obviously you're very, very bad against Oath being a creature-based deck. And then a bunch of just a little bit of hate for shops, because again they can really play fine into Stormy Silence. Of note is that I've played these Ocelot Pride versions with blue white instead of white black. They are very good into dredge as they are, just because of Ocelot Pride basically stonewalling Icorids and really making a very wide board. So regardless, despite having like what I don't consider Constellation Breeze to be good dredge hate, but generally this dredge hate is a little subpar if you were not playing these cards, and they play very well into it. So overall, a pretty well-rounded deck. It's very interesting to see this like aggro version of Lurus coming into the forefront. So expect to see this in a couple more this week and the next one probably, as it continues to evolve. Erode is coming into the meta, which could, I doubt it, but could be played instead of a couple of these plows, just because it's always weird to see Swords to Plowshares in an aggressive deck of sorts, because this is not as Frog where you want to make the game long, you want to make the game very small. So we'll see. I don't expect it, but it's a possibility. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about this, everything moved out, phenomenal, thanks, MTGO Online, about this bug list. So we are seeing this bug version was playing 2 Deathrite Shamans, which seems to be the kind of like the content is starting to drift away from playing DRS. Sprouts, a very prolific legacy player, qualified for the Showcase qualifier vintage with a Sultai deck with, it wasn't Lurus, it was playing Murktides and no Deathrite Shaman. And this version is playing just 2, which I think that it's time for Deathrite Shaman. I think it's starting to just fade out of where it is. In terms of like just being a instant 4-off, it's starting to feel like a little too slow, and you just want to slam like luck pieces plus things that grant you incremental advantage. We're also not seeing any of the Kishla Skimmer versions. These are just like, very efficient, just 4 oofs, 4 frogs, and just a couple DRSs, a bunch of removal, a bunch of lock pieces, and just counter spells galore. And so also a deck that is pretty interesting to see. I am not sure, because I haven't played it, although I might start playing this week just to see how it feels, how the pairing against PO is. I suspect it really depends on whether you have the 2 to 4 to 0 DRSs and stuff like that. So yeah, that is basically all that we had for this week, plus one of the decks that I thought was very interesting. For next week, it's kind of interesting to see where we're gonna go. As we mentioned, like if I just rearrange this again, I was kind of surprised by the lack of Lurus decks in general, and now, I mean, if we count, you could count this as a Lurus deck too, so let's just put it here. You see like this almost half of the meta being Lurus decks of different kinds of flavors between combo control here, this 5, and just pure frog versus just like almost like stacks in prison. This is a pretty interesting spread. Of note is that if this deck becomes more popular, frog becomes a lot better. This deck is not that good against that sort of strategies in my experience so far, specifically Bowmasters pinging most of the creatures out of existence and not really having that much to pull through. But we'll see if it ends up overlapping or adapting. Right now, the versions that we saw were very clearly spec'd to beat the artifact decks, and then very teched on the sideboard to survive the combo metagame. We'll see if Dredge starts lowering in numbers. Again, 4 on top 8 on both weeks is high numbers for what this is. And yeah, just generally, we didn't see any Tinker decks making it through. If you could consider Jewel a Tinker deck, but that's not the main goal of the deck. And so we'll see how it goes. We barely saw just, PO disappear last week and very little Frog. We sort of predicted a bit of a resurgence on Frog, or just like new Rod decks that played counter spells, and so we had a couple more, as well as, 4 POs going back into the meta in stakes of these workshop decks. So we'll see for next week. This seems a little bit more in line with what I would expect. Obviously, we had this breakout deck. We'll see. Also, keep an eye out to see if this deck persists. Same thing for Bug. We saw a lot of actually like DRS play, Loros DRS decks, about 5 or 7, give or take, for the dumps, which is a relatively high number. So we'll see if that also persists next week. But yeah, that's basically all I had for you guys today. Again, I'm gonna drop a link to what idea that Justin had for this deck, as well as a link for the 19th MTG Open on Wednesday if you're interested. That is Paper Legacy here in New York City. So yeah, that's basically all we have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.